Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Renee Mehrra. Thank you for joining in on Zoom with Renee. This year, we've been celebrating India at 75 with many iconic events around the globe commemorating Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. And I've also shared a couple of videos with you before as well on India at 75. Today, we continue saluting and paying a rich tribute to our unsung heroes who laid their lives for the country's independence. We're going to back and revisit the time of Quit India movement that was started by Mahatma Gandhi ji. And this is it's an untold real story of a brave, courageous magistrate from the Balia district in Uttar Pradesh, Mr. Jagdishwar Nigam, who defied the orders of his superiors. He was an ICS officer. At that time, it was called the Imperial Civil Service, and it later on became Indian Civil Service. He defied the orders of his superiors and took the bold step to transfer the power to the people of Balia with another nationalist leader, Chitu Pandey, as the head. And that was 19 August 1942. It didn't last too long, but it created so much of incredible traction and momentum and spurred people on to the country's independence. So today, it's going to be the book. It's called The Untold Story, the real story, the administrator, Mr. Jagdishwar Nigam versus British Raj, 19 August 1942. Now, this book, as we see, our guests are showing it right in the background. This book was, the author of this book was Mrs. Sheila Darbari, the daughter of Mr. Jagdishwar Nigam. And she started writing this book when she was 90 years old. She completed the manuscript, but she could not live seeing it being published. And we have the co-authors of this book. They are the Darbari sisters, Dr. Raj and Janis Darbari. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you, Renee. It's lovely meeting you after a long time.
Yes.
And we're going to talk about Mr. Jagdishwar Nigam, who's our grandfather.
I see the pictures of your mom in the middle, and your father, Mr. Darbari, and then also Mr. Jagdishwar Nigam, and then you have Bagi Balia. So you have these, you just had this big launch of this book just recently with a lot of political dignitaries, and you've received a lot of rich tributes from people from Bollywood and also from ambassadors. So congratulations, Mr. Jay Shankar.
What's his External Affairs, Mr. Jay Shankar, being presented the book of the administrator, and he was very happy to receive it as he'd heard a lot about the book.
So let's go back to the genesis of this book. And I know that your mother, Mrs. Sheila Darbari, has an eyewitness account. So this narrative is an eyewitness account as to what happened during that time in 1942.
Yes, that's very true. I mean, this just didn't happen off the hat. It is, in fact, a major scoop because as we took out the documents from the National Archives in India and in Great Britain, they told the true and absolute real story. And this was enabled because our mother, Sheila Darbari, being the daughter of Jagdishwar Nigam, had met Mr. Modi when she was lobbying for her father to be reinstated and said he had done nothing wrong. And that is the big episode of Bagi Balia, which took place. And Bagi Balia, why is it called Bagi Balia? You'll read about it in the book. But let's go back to the history point. It's a historical thriller, like Farah Khan, actually, when we were talking, she said, this book is a historical thriller. And then, of course, Rini, just like you mentioned, we have a lovely letter from Amitabh Bachchan saying this particular book is a book which will bring history, the pages of history to life.
It says it will energize the youth to be deeply invested in their culture and the creation of a better India, new, innovative, and progressive. So I think those are beautiful words by such a great seasoned Bollywood celebrity is Mr. Amitabh Bachchan, and even Farah Khan has paid a very rich tribute.
Well, you see why? It's the character which inspires you. Mr. Nigam when he was 7 years old. Isn't it correct, Raj Darbari?
Yes, that's right. He was only 7 years old when he was going with his father. His father took him, who was a reader of the court, he took him to the court along with him. And when he saw atrocities being committed by the magistrate, injustice, complete injustice, he turned around and told his dad, Papa, I'm going to be sitting in that chair. And believe me, I will bring justice, peace, and love to this country. And I will show them how to transfer the power. It just came into his head. I'm going to do it. And this thought took birth in his mind. And then his father asked him, how are you going to do it? He says, I'm going to study so hard that I'm going to leave everybody behind and I'm going to be one of the toppers in the ICS office. So that's exactly what he became. They say, as you think, you become. And as you plan your life, you make it that way. The thoughts get ingrained in your brain. And when children of 7 years old and 8 years old begin to think that way, they think big and they perform. Exactly, he did that.
He used to study under the lamppost. In those days, we didn't have all these facilities which the youngsters have of today. And that's why Amitabh Bachchan has rightly said it will inspire you. Because when you have to study and through hardships and you achieve your goals through hardships, it wasn't easy to beat the British boy who had studied perhaps in one of the best schools in England. And he came into the ICS. At that time in the ICS in 1923, when our grandfather, Nana, actually he was the top 4 in the batch, and there were only 4 Indians.
Wow.
And the rest were all Britishers. So in 1923, he was welcomed with band and baja. And the whole of UP said, our person from Jhansi. And very important is that he was born in Moranipur in Jhansi, where Bundelkhandi is known for that fervor of freedom.
Rani of Jhansi,
the Rani of Jhansi.
Right.
Khub ladi thi Rani. So the whole thing is that these type of tales, when they also impacted his mind as a child, the people, the British people were very, very focused that no Bundelkhandi should come forward because they saw revolution in the eyes of that particular Bundelkhandi. So for you as an ICS officer, because you came on your merit. In fact, when he was sat for the ICS exam, the whole story is that they set a maths paper, which was everything was set in such a way that it was difficult to answer. And he reorganized the whole question and he answered it. So the British said, my God, here is a mathematical genius. So he was known to be the genius, actually, even at that time. And he could close his eyes and count the revenue of the whole state. And when he went to Cambridge, because the ICS officer was trained in Cambridge. So as an Indian, you were just one of the few again. And you were there in Cambridge. You were being trained. You were trained to be an administrator. And that's why we've called the book The Administrator.
Exactly.
And so why don't you share? That is why it's called The Administrator. Because he knew the power of his pen. He saw Rani of Jhansi die in front of the cannons of the British. Now, that was an example which perhaps he did not want to follow. And he created that history when in Balia on 19th August 1942, he made the historical order deposit the guns in the Balia police station. And Riaz Ahmed Khan, who was the superintendent of police, he said, sir, I salute your nationalism and I'm with you. So here we have a Muslim and a Hindu, both together, actually go together, open the jail gates for Chittu Pandey, who's the nationalist leader, and say, come to the collectorate. And my grandfather, he was the collector. Now, Renu, you said the right thing. It was the Quit India time. And the moment Gandhiji told the Britishers quit India, their defense came forward, emergency was promulgated, and shoot aside orders were given. Now, as a magistrate and collector, it was his job to shoot aside. But he said, deposit the guns. He went against the very spirit of the British.
The spirit of non-violence.
And he said, Main khoon sani roti nahi khaunga. I will not eat bread soaked in blood. So can you imagine the type of character he must have had? And he knew when he wrote those orders, he had organized about 40,000 people to enter Balia.
That too was organized with the strategic point
And-
of what he worked upon throughout his entire life, of how to get all the people of Balia, UP, and the local districts
Banaras.
of Banaras around Balia also to join in that 40,000 crowd. Now, how to get 40,000 crowd across?
Under the nose of the British, where there are strict orders, shoot aside, military is out, everything is out. And the Azad train, which came from Banaras, is of course a part of history. All the students came into Balia. And when they came, they all marched towards the my Nana's collectorate, because the planning was release Chitu Pandey, bring him out. My grandfather would take down the flag of the British with great honor. And he told Chitu Pandey, you raise the flag now, India. And everybody started singing the beautiful, famous song, Chanda Ucha Rahe Hamara. Let the flag of India fly
Right.
freely in the sky.
And the most dramatic point of his feelings, which he was feeling, my mother said that he felt so proud at that moment that he was able to deliver what he thought and dreamt of. And the fact is, the first thing that he did was to throw his solar hat down and say, there goes the British Raj, I did it. And he transferred the power. And he was the first officer, British officer, that transferred the power from Britain to India.
Yeah.
And Chintu Pandey was made head of the government. And this fact has been hidden from all of us. None of us got to know that the first transfer of power took place on 19th of August, 1942.
So you can count the days. 8th August, you have Gandhiji being put in jail by the 9th of August. Aruna Asif Ali tries to raise the flag in the Gwalior tank in Mumbai. She's arrested, Nehru's arrested, everybody's arrested, they're all put in jail. You have Kanik Latta in Assam trying to raise the flag, she's shot dead. You have in Bihar, the Shanti Smarak made, because on 11th August, everybody is shot dead, the 13 people.
Mobs were shot.
Everybody was shot dead, whoever tried to raise the flag. And this is when my grandfather said, enough is enough.
It's not
And
normal.
if the ICS doesn't get up now, they'll never get up. So as the ICS officer, he was the first one. And I'm very proud to say that being the first collector, ICS officer who took the stand, it thunderbolted into the minds of all the British administrators that if the police and the ICS, the administrators get together, then they could not put them into jail. Because at that time, you could not shoot an ICS officer because he was on His Majesty's service. So the Wavell, who was the commander-in-chief, he knew this. And so when he had to give orders, recapture Balia. So Balia was independent for almost 14 days. And the last 5 crucial days, when the military and the police were sanctioned by Wavell to enter Balia, because Nedasol, the commissioner who was in Banaras, he was like, how did this man do it? I was in Balia on the 12th of August. Waddell, the Inspector General of the police from Gorakhpur, he said, I was also in Balia, and Mr. Nigam said, give me troops. And I said, but there's so much of peace.
Everything is under control.
Everything is under control.
We don't need to give you any more.
When did he do this? And how did it happen? Became such an enigma for them that they were so frightened. What is going to happen next?
Yeah.
The fear had crept in. Oh my God.
Terrified.
They were absolutely terrified. My grandfather says that I refused to leave Balia. And the moment they were hanging people from the trees, I told Wavell and
you can't do this.
You can't do this. I wrote letters and I sent telegrams to people who I knew in Great Britain. And I created havoc. He and Riazuddin Ahmed Khan. It is a beautiful story where they both sit in the residence of the collector and they're writing one fax after the other. Write to Moody, who's the chief secretary. Hollet, who is the governor. You cannot do this to the people of Balia. So they said, Mr. Nigam, we are going to suspend you. He said, you can suspend me, but you cannot do this inhuman act. So because of an officer's strong stand, the Britishers had to back off. And what did they do? They cordoned off Balia. They muffled the press. BBC was muffled.
That's why the story never came up.
The story never was allowed to move out of Balia. What happened? And when this whole thing came to the corridors of power in Great Britain. Stuart Emery, who was the Home Secretary and the Cabinet Minister, they all questioned him. What is happening in the Parliament?
How many helicopters got shot down?
And that was
How many
discussed in the
people
Parliament.
Discussed in the Parliament, which we have brought into the book. All those discussions, which make it so interesting
Yeah.
that we sit here thinking that the Britishers only said shoot at sight. It was done maybe by the Prime Minister who gave orders because they wanted India, and maybe the Wavell, who was the Commander-in-Chief of Army, who has a very great name because he's a great strategist and he won many wars. So how could Mr. Nigam, underneath his own intelligence, do this?
Yeah, it actually brings so much of feelings of nationalistic pride when we hear these stories. And this is an untold story of such a big hero with so much of valor and bravery and courage. He just did it. And I believe that after that, Wavell was replaced by Lord Mountbatten, the last Viceroy of India at that time.
Yes,
we all didn't understand that Wavell, why he was dismissed, but because there was a change in the Parliament and in the British Prime Ministership.
Church.
And when the facts came to light and the discussions took place, there was also one great information that came forth is that Churchill with Roosevelt had signed the Atlantic Charter of the United Nations. So when you're talking about democracy, when you're talking about peace in the United Nations, Churchill, Roosevelt, then obviously the ICS officers, all of them should have said, sir, please don't shoot any more Indians. We can't take this order because it goes against the Atlantic Charter, which you people are signing.
Well, that's the big boy sitting.
Here's that picture. Okay.
That's the big boy sitting, discussing what has happened in India. That's Wavell as the Viceroy of India. Sitting right in the center, and that's the Viceroy Council. Now you can imagine, Wavell was the Commander-in-Chief of the Army, then made the Viceroy
of India.
And all the ICS officers were looking, what's going to happen to Mr.
scared
Nigam?
of him.
What's going to happen to Mr. Nigam? And Mr. Nigam was not frightened. My mother says when he came back from Balia, he was smoking his cigarette. And the cover page, which you see, that's a photograph taken by my mother.
Yeah.
As soon as he entered the drawing room, he said, I did it. My dear children, I've done it. And interesting thing is that
smile is the sign, his victory.
It's a victory sign.
Victory sign.
He was a chain smoker. So he always had his cigarette in his mouth, and he was very stylish, dressed the British style. My grandmother was very stylish. She used to get all her saris made in Banaras. So it was like chicken in the basket. You have an ICS officer and he just throws it all away and says, that's enough. And he wears the khadi kurta and his pajama and he wears the hat. And he says, this is India. And now the Britishers, as a case study, they wanted to scare all the ICS officers. So Wavell, the first thing he did as he became the Viceroy of India, 15 members who were all ministers in the Viceroy's Council. He got them together, and more than half were of Indian origin. And well, if I start taking the names, is a person who everybody knows, which is, of course, it's Mr. B.R. Ambedkar. And he was on that Viceroy Council, and he signed. He signed
the dismissal of
removal of
Riaz.
Mr. Nigam and Riazuddin from the ICS. So if I tell you all the other names like J.P. Srivastav, in fact, he came crying to my grandfather that please withdraw your court case against the British government. They're going to kill you. He said, I am not going to move my stand. I uphold the democratic values and principles, and the peaceful transfer of power is the only way to bring in peace in India. And we are very lucky people, actually, the Indians, that this ICS officer, when he took that stand, the Britishers somewhere down the line, like Attlee, who was in the Labour Party, he was a good friend of my grandfather, they all actually understood what he was saying.
Because deep down in your heart, everybody wants peace, every human being. And with World War I, World War II, and everybody trying to defend their country, their troops and everything, your whole mind can get swayed into a different form of negative energy.
But the
And-
positive energy was when in 1947,
Yeah.
he transfers the same power in a smooth way to India. That is what you call the impact of Mr.
Nigam's-
Jagdishwar Nigam's principled stand with the people of Ballia and the police force.
Yeah. So,
So
that's
when
the August Kranti movement, and you brought out to the fore in this book so many great events and history that nobody before had talked about.
Or
Why is it that
researched
this part of the history was not really put out? Um,
or researched upon
Public.
as we never
No, it
researched.
wasn't right, really. You're right. It was hidden in the archives. And because my grandfather was an ICS officer, his file was taken to Great Britain, into the archives there. So anybody who would search for it in India will not get it. So it was obviously a fact they wanted to hide also.
And when you put all the facts together, you find and realize that actually Mr. Nigam's strategy of the transfer of power became a catalyst for the British government when Attlee took over. Because if we go
He
back
became the
to
beacon of light.
became the beacon of light. If you go back to February 47, in February 47, the riots between the Hindu Muslims had started off. And Attlee didn't, of course, some of them wanted the partition, but others also in the British government did not want the partition. And when they saw so much of bloodshed taking place between the Hindus and the Muslims, then obviously somewhere down the line, the Britishers said, let's wash our hands off now.
No,
No,
more than
you
just
can't.
wash your hands off. When Riazuddin Ahmed Khan and Mr. Nigam had taken a stand, Mr. Nigam, my grandfather, he was such an expert in revenue. He knew the pockets where the Muslims were and where they were rich and how the division was being planned on paper. So he actually stopped the heartland of India being torn apart. And it just was a very small part of, I would say, to the northwest frontier where they managed to wedge into the mind of the people and create that partition, which is a very sad story. And Moody, who was the chief secretary, he became the first governor of Sindh. And he was a great friend of my grandfather. And my grandfather knew that Moody was up to this because he supported every act of Jinnah.
And then later
So
on,
these stories, the bureaucrats knew. If they knew it, our question as historians is, then why didn't they take action like Mr. Nigam? What was happening to the other ICS officers like Mr. Vishnu Sahai? I read the file, and in the file, Mr. Vishnu Sahai, who's a very celebrated bureaucrat in independent India, he was the one who encouraged the dismissal of the ICS officer, Mr. Nigam, and they were batchmates. So you can understand within the services, there was a division. And here you had Dharamveer, who was another ICS officer, who was junior to my grandfather, and he turned around and said, Mr. Nigam, we support you. You do what you have to do. So those 3 years, my grandfather fought the Britishers. He had the lobby of the British, the ICS was half totally with my grandfather, and half of those Indians, in fact, if you talk of certain bureaucrats, they had already planned to shift to Pakistan.
Shift to Pakistan, which had not been made yet.
Which had not yet been created.
And they were all offered ministership by Mr. Modi himself. He was one of the masterminds there.
They were all running around him like he was the queen bee. And in fact, when the inquiry was taking place to keep my grandfather silent, Siddiqui, who was the doctor, the medical chap in Ballia, he was asked to give witness against my grandfather. And then later on, you see, Siddiqui's daughters and my mother grew up together. So after this whole thing of partition took place, they came back to collect some of their stuff in India, and they came to visit my Nana. So my Nana said, how do you find your Pakistan? And then he turned around, his daughter said, we don't like it because we have to go into Parda now. So from independent India, these young children also were feeling the difference.
It was a sad story.
It was very sad. My mother said, when I saw my 2 friends turning around and telling me, we don't like it because we have to change our whole lifestyle. But their father wanted it because he wanted the power that he was offered there.
So when you
these stories, in fact, I think we should encourage more and more historical facts to come out about this time. Because like if you've seen the films like the Garam Hawa, you will understand the shifting of the minds, the tearful shifting actually, and the way people were torn apart. And the ICS officers were a part of that freedom struggle. Why didn't they all unite with my grandfather is a question I throw to them. But what Mr. Nigam could do, didn't you have the guts to do it? If he was the tiger, he was like a sher jo
Yeah.
dara. Wow, what were you people doing?
Like, who will bell the cat? But he did it. He did it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
When we
Now,
came-
this book could be made into a screenplay, and there's going to be a film.
Yes, yes,
Yes.
those are plans which we are going ahead with, because it is a movie material, and also not far beyond that, because it will help the Indians to understand who was a catalyst to make the British give us independence. Because if the mobs had joined Gandhiji, he had a mass following, and it went on for quite a number of years, but the Britishers were not scared so much of them or the freedom fighters. Why? Because they could easily shoot them or put them into jail. So who were they frightened of? They got frightened when that mob joined up with the ICS officers, the state officers, the police, then they can get massacred. And this is exactly what Attlee started saying. And all the British Parliament, that let us not shoot people, because we are going against what we are already signing in the the Atlantic Charter. There is a conflict. You can't do both. No? Shoot it side one side and the other side signing an Atlantic Charter. I think it must have been a tremendous dichotomy is going on in various forms of British people.
There's a film in the works right now.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Well, Renee, if you look at it, it's a historical thriller. Farah Khan put it very, very cutely. It's a historical thriller where we've never had an officer actually standing up to the British. And here we have an officer standing up, a British officer standing up against his own British officers and saying, you can't do this. And this is a very valuable piece of history. So for posterity,
it's important.
This is very important because it measures in world peace. Like many of the ambassadors who came from different countries for the book release, which we just recently had on August 7th. And in fact, we also had the RSS leader, Mr. Indresh Kumar, and the MP from Balia. They all looked at the order and they said, during World War I and World War II, and during this transition period, where there was nothing marked by guns and bombs and guns and bombs. Here we have one order which says, deposit the guns in the Balia Police Reserve lines.
And transfer the power. So end of all the atrocities. And we would have got independence. The whole of India would have got independence in 1942. Had all the ICS officers and the police officers joined in forces with Jagdishwar Nigam.
So what was the fate of Mr. Nigam in the end?
We all know one thing, that when an officer cannot be shot at, and Weval, the commander-in-chief, was romping mad. He was huffing and puffing all over in the corridors. If I had my way, I would shoot him. But law was enforced.
Did they make him resign?
They tried. They tried to make him resign on medical grounds. And he refused. He said, I am not sick. I know what I'm doing.
I didn't do what I did was not wrong. And I'm going to explain that to my government, the British Empire, because I am their officer. And it is my duty as a citizen of the world, he often said that to stop any atrocities going on. And those people who have perhaps got lost in that, maybe, as he said, because at the end of it, he says, we will have to forgive and forget. And that is the way out for both Britain and India. And for the prosperity of India and British, that's how he explained it, his behavior. God's grace, that he gives you the right words to say to people to stop atrocities, stop this kind of violence. We don't need it. Life is too short for this kind of violence.
Absolutely. Yeah, violence is not the way to go. So I'm a strong believer of choosing peace.
Yes.
Time. Well, thank you very much. We hope to see this movie coming up hopefully soon as a historic thriller, and the administrator Jagdishwar Nigam versus the British Raj, 19th August 1942. Thank you both, Dr. Raj Darbari and Dr. Janis Darbari, and wish you all the very best. I'm Dr. Renee Mehrra. Stay healthy, stay positive.